Bam. All right, Drew. How you doing? And like we just said, we've never actually sat down for a chat before, so this is great. Thanks to the Unchained team for sorting this out.
No, I'm excited to speak with you. Thanks, Daniel.
All right, so Lauren, you're going to kick off with the first question here.
In your opinion, what is the most important thing about Bitcoin?
Wow. Most important thing about it. Let me think. It's the newest and best form of money that we've ever invented. I suppose that would be my one-line answer.
You weren't expecting one line, were you?
No.
Well, he got you.
Damn.
All right, the ball's back in your court.
It's like supposed to put you in the, what's it called?
Put him in the hot seat.
Put him,
Yeah.
You didn't, you flip things around.
Yeah, you're in the hot seat now. So have you got a follow-up question?
Give me a second.
Maybe I'll suggest one for you. Is why do I believe that money, a new kind of money, is even important in the first place?
Yeah, I mean that's kind of a follow-on from the original. Yeah.
Yeah, you can ask a different question. That was just something I'm realizing I didn't really explain that in my little cop-out one-liner answer.
Did you have another one come to your mind? Go on, go
on. Why are you so serious about Bitcoin?
Why am I so serious? I like that. I would say that I wasn't always so serious about it. I think originally it was something I was curious and excited about, but I think it helps not to be too serious about your work. It gives you some perspective. What I found is over many years of like working on Bitcoin, thinking about it, it wasn't what I thought it was, which is to say it wasn't a fun side project to build a company in for a couple of years and then move on to something else. It turned out to be something that like really caught me and excited my passions, made me feel like I was doing something really valuable. I've had prior businesses before that I've founded, and I'm proud of the work that I did at those other businesses, but I somehow feel like the work we're doing at Unchained to support Bitcoin and Bitcoin custody and education and so on is somehow more important and valuable and more impactful. And so the opportunity to take something that I thought was just a few years like fun project and turn it into something that's now gone for me, like gosh, like 8 or 9 years that I've been working on this. I guess it better be important because I've been here for a while. And I suppose that surprised me. I really didn't think that, you know, when maybe I was 30 years old, like 10 years ago, first starting to get into Bitcoin, I really didn't think that a decade from now I would still be working on it and thinking about it. But that's what happened.
Yeah, still thinking about it every day, right? And still
Yeah,
learning
totally.
about it every day, which is
Correct.
That's what grabs us and keeps us here. The fact that it's so humbling in every respect, and then the epiphanies never stop coming, and you can't stop sharing those ideas, and that is obviously represented through your writing and your different pieces. I mean, you've been to space and back, what, like 3 times? I think that's a 3-parter. That one. Yeah, I urge everybody to go and read Drew's work. It's or employ Guy Swan like I do, buy a Fountain app, by streaming him sats as I listen to his soothing voice as he reads me the work written by other Bitcoiners. He's a great resource. Well, anyway, thanks for your questions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for putting me on the spot.
No problem.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So, Drew, I wanted to ask you about your past lives because, and I did have your website up here, and now it has gone. So now I've got to find it again because I wanted to read straight from it. voluntarymind.com. Past lives. And this is one common thread of this show and one common thread of the plebs that I meet.
Oh, wow. So I feel like before you go too much further, Daniel, I should point out that this is not me. Yeah, this is this very annoying and clever and brilliant other person named Drew. who happens to both have gotten the Druve handle on Twitter. So DHRUV on Twitter is not me, it's actually him. And he's a Bitcoin core contributor, which I am not technically.
Technically.
Technically, yes. He's someone that I don't know. I actually really follow online and kind of I'm slightly jealous of because of his position and accomplishments in online stuff. But no, technically that's not me. My website is non-existent and probably worse if it did exist.
So just the Unchained blog is where people can find your work.
That's mostly where I've been publishing. Exactly, that's right.
Right. Okay. Well, still, the thread of the show is to unpack what people were doing before Bitcoin and figuring out that path that they took to come to the realization that, as you were telling Lauren just a second ago, that this was something very important. This is going to change my life. And then making that jump. What was that, that leap to getting out of the fiat world and then into the Bitcoin one? So can you take us back to like perhaps your mid-teen years? What was going on? Where were you growing up? What were mom and dad doing? And then we'll just take that little arc through.
Yeah, sure. I think I grew up moving around a lot, immigrating a lot. I was born in New Delhi in India. My folks were physicians. They kind of did this very common thing, it turns out, amongst physicians of Indian origin and in their era, which was you kind of get trained in India. You decide you would rather move to the West, so you go to England, and then you spend some time there, and then you realize, actually, this ain't that great. America's where it's really at, and then you move to America. And so you drag your poor kids through many years of having to readjust and change their accents and pop back and forth into all sorts of different school programs. And it was a really formative, I would say, way to grow up for me, I think in a variety of ways. Like first, it's kind of cool moving over the whole planet, like during the course of growing up, like, I think gives you a lot of important experiences. And then of course you go back and visit, right? So you're not just growing up in one place in one country, you feel a bit more international. That's cool. Second, I feel like because I moved around so much, even within the United States, I think I got here by the time I was 7.5 years old. But my parents were getting trained here as physicians again, so they had to move. It's from residency to fellowship, from location to location. It probably wasn't until about age 13, 14 that my parents got some stability and kind of were mostly in the same place for a number of years. So pretty much up until like age 14, I kind of moved either every year or almost about as frequently as that. And to be a kid, being the new kid a lot of times in a row is it changes you a little bit. I think I became pretty self-reliant. I became pretty closed. Like I knew or sort of implicitly felt that like, oh, if I make really great friends in this school district, maybe next year I might be living somewhere else. And I think what it led me to is I can be pretty gregarious and pretty easy to get along with, but I'm pretty walled off. Like I think I kind of have a little bit of a personal wall up, and folks who are able to get over that wall, people who become close friends of mine, like man, I really cherish them because I feel I don't have too many of those. Probably because of I think the way that I put up the wall a little bit, and so I tend to be this person that is at once very open and labile and fun, perhaps sometimes at parties, but secretly I'm just a huge introvert. And then, the small number of really, really close friends I have just are really important to me. So I think that's growing up that way and definitely influenced me. I think the self-reliance part is something I continue to rely upon all the time today. It's hard to be an entrepreneur. You need to rely upon yourself a lot. You have to have a lot of strength in your own vision, a lot of belief in yourself. It's very easy to imagine failure, and everyone around you will tell you that you're going to fail. And so you kind of got to be a little irrational, and you got to just be, well, I know I just got here. You don't know me from anybody, but I'm going to win. I'm going to succeed. So there's an element of that that's important. And I would say, similarly, I started this business Unchained with my best friend and co-founder, Joe Kelly, who I started my prior business with. I met him in Austin like 15, 20 years ago at this point. And so it's kind of, he's another similar person, like very self-driven, very self-reliant. And we're really tight. We're really good friends. We're also very complementary in our skill sets. Like I'm much more technical. Joe's much more business oriented. And together, I think it's really helped us. It's what allowed us to start and grow Unchained in the early days. And we still continue to rely upon each other even now.
Did you have any siblings through all of that growing up?
Yeah, I have a younger sister. I think she benefited a lot by just being, 4.5 years younger than me. So a lot of that moving around, she experienced it too. But I think for her, our family got to be stable, if you like, by the time she was like 9. So as for me, I was already a teenager. And so I don't know, I think she still lives in the Northeast. She, I think, has pretty much stayed in the area that we grew up in like her entire life, and is still really close to my family and like, really well connected. And I'm of course the weirdo that as soon as I turned 18, left for college, never really looked back, like left for Texas right after college. Now I'm in California. So I've kind of continued my little journey of moving quite a bit.
Were there expectations as well, like parental expectations to follow in the footsteps, go into the same line of work, any kind of pressures like that?
Yeah, I think my parents were very classic Asian parents in some ways, because it was, you got to get A's, you got to like work
Right.
hard, you got to make something of yourself. But I'm happy that they weren't very rigid in terms of like, and you have to do it in exactly this way. In fact, I think rather the opposite. My parents were both physicians, and being a physician is like a pretty incredibly hard job. Um, it used to be the case that it paid really well. I don't think it really pays that well anymore, like given the incredible amount of schooling and training and liability and risk and hard work. And I think these days, if you want to be a physician, it can't be because you think you're going to get paid well or because it's prestigious. It has to be because you really love the work of being a physician. And I think my parents, who are again both physicians, they sort of realized that for them, that was one of like 3 careers that maybe they could have pursued coming out of India in the 1970s kind of thing. But growing up in America in the 90s with the internet and all this, there's so many other options. And I don't think they ever sort of forced me into a particular career path. I'll also credit my dad a lot. Despite being a physician, he's extremely like technical, and he's kind of a gadgets guy, and he's always been really into computers and all sorts of other stuff. There's a part of me, and I think perhaps a part of him, that imagines, if he had grown up in the United States in the 1970s instead of in India, maybe he would have had a lot more options open to him. Maybe he would have become not a physician. I'm not sure. I could easily see my dad being a computer programmer and really loving that kind of a career. And growing up in the era of people that built the internet and so on, I could totally see him loving that stuff. But he didn't get that chance. I did. So I looked at my parents' lifestyle and was like, gosh, they worked so hard. Yeah, we have an awesome life. Like, we're not hurting by any means, but it's not like they're as wealthy as my friends' parents, who are, not physicians, who are, quote unquote, just business people or whatever else it is. So I think early on, I divorced the notion of like being a doctor is like one of the only ways to have a comfortable, wealthy lifestyle. I sort of learned that there's an infinity of things that you can do. And I think for me, growing up, I was super into science. And so I kind of went to college with this notion that I would be a scientist. I majored in physics and mathematics when I was in college, and went to graduate school in Texas. That's how I wound up in Austin. And I think that was an interesting experience for me, because I think maybe I didn't realize that there was such a thing as entrepreneurism, like the notion of startups and stuff. Like, it wasn't in culture the way it is, now. Like there was no Facebooks, there was no Mark Zuckerberg, there was no, deification of like rich tech bros. Like none of that existed. And so, growing up in Long Island or whatever in the 1990s, I didn't consider that was a path for me. At the same time, I didn't really want to, quote unquote, get a job or whatever. I didn't want to go into finance like a lot of my peers at the time wanted to. This was, of course, prior to the global financial crisis. So I think I thought of academics as like a way to not have to work somehow, right? That you just get to focus on things that you find interesting, and you get to study those your whole life. And if that's really what academics had turned out to be, maybe I would still be an academic physicist. Of course, it's really not true of academics. Like, it is a really hard job. You have a lot of teaching responsibilities. You're constantly having to fundraise. You're not paid nearly as well as you might be if you were doing almost anything else with your same skill sets and intelligence. And I think after a number of years trying to be a physicist, getting my PhD or working on my PhD in a PhD program, I remember very distinctly a moment where I was hanging out with a bunch of older physics folks who I really looked up to, people whose papers I'd been reading, and I thought were almost the definition of what success might look like for me if I were to continue in that path. And then I sort of realized, wait a minute, these people are all like in their late 30s and early 40s. Like few of them are married, like they don't own homes. They have to move every couple of years because they're constantly chasing that next assistant professorship or whatever else it is. And I was suddenly like, oh my gosh, like I don't know that this is the most stable career path, and I started to develop some doubts. I think I'm very happy that I allowed myself to entertain those doubts. Like entertaining some of those doubts is what led to me meeting Joe and the co-founder of our last business, a guy named Pleb, and sort of taking a risk and deciding, despite the fact that I told everybody I wanted to be a scientist for 10, 15 years, taking a risk on doing something totally different. And I will say that I think I'm much better equipped to be an entrepreneur than to be a scientist. I love science. Science is great, but building businesses can be very scientific. There's a lot of testing and hypothesis construction and data collection and cleverness. And I think, moreover, something that really makes me feel really excited today is, given all the backgrounds that I've had, like being a physics math person, building my first company with Joe was all about large scale online distributed computing systems. So like kind of the stuff that Google was doing, helping other businesses achieve similar massive data projects. That really clued me in, by the way, to how distributed systems and databases and things like that work on the internet. And then coming into Bitcoin, suddenly it's like, there are days that I feel like maximally utilized. Like in a given day, I was thinking about mathematics, I was thinking about computer science, I was thinking about business opportunities, and it's all because Bitcoin kind of brings all those things together. And so that makes me feel amazing. Like I'm using every part of my education and myself when I'm at work. And I don't know, that's, for a person like me, that's just very satisfying.
Mate, right, okay. You've given me lots of threads to pull on here. So thank you for that. Entrepreneurship, let's go there, because like you said, you were going down the academic path. I've often said on this show, when talking about the education system, how it basically diminishes our ability to think for ourselves and keeps us suppressed and keeps us confused. And I honestly think that the human natural default state is entrepreneurial, is to be, to follow entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial pursuits, because we're human beings, we're problem solving machines. That's just what we do. But you sit through 15 to 18 years, and depending how long you take that on with extended studies, being taught stuff and having it forced down your neck, and this is the way it is, and here's the answer at the end of the book. You seem to have broken that mold, though, because like you did the further extended studies and then still came out and managed to become an entrepreneur. It's not many people do that, I don't think. I think most people will get trapped. Well, they'll paint themselves into that academic corner and then just double down every 4 years, like you were saying, and chasing that, So why you? Why break out? What happened?
I think I had a lot of support, to be honest. I remember when I was contemplating leaving physics and more fully working on, what at the time was not a real business, just more of an idea that Joe and I and our other co-founder Flip were contemplating. And I remember just having a conversation with my dad about it. And like, hey, I'm like kind of feeling like I fucked up here, Dad. Like I'm 25 years old and contemplating dropping out of this program that I've been building towards my whole life, and I'm feeling really nervous about this. And I have a very supportive family, and I think my dad's response, I'll never forget it. He was like, son, I'll always support you. Whatever you want to do, you want to move to Los Angeles and become an actor, I will support that. You want to do something else, like blah blah blah. It's ironic that I live in Los Angeles now, but I am not an actor. I just felt really confident when my dad said that. And if I'm honest with myself, like being an entrepreneur was really hard. Those early years, I had no salary. My parents were some of the first investors in Joe and I's first business. They were some of the first investors in Unchained. I'd like to believe that they've benefited greatly from those investments. Like I've returned on those investments for them. But truthfully, I think I had a tremendous amount of support, and so that made the transition a lot easier to contemplate. I never felt that it was disappointing them. And honestly, I think the riskiest thing about entrepreneurism is like just dumb things, like you lose your health insurance because you're no longer employed by somebody. So now you have to figure out simple things like that weren't as hard for me to overcome because I had tremendous support. So that was a huge, huge help for me. Also, I think it was just this is a little bit of an aspect of, I think, just being a lazy person, that I think I've always struggled to work on things that don't excite me. Like whether it's, I remember a famous struggle in my life as a kid was having to memorize the multiplication tables. I remember in like whatever, third or fourth grade when they make you do that. And I hated it because it was like, it was not something you could like understand. You just had to sit there and do the work to memorize it. And it was a big fight in growing up. My parents were always like, "Oh, did you make any progress on your 3 times tables today? Like you were supposed to finish that." And so I've always struggled to do things like that feel like rote work. And what felt so exciting about academics was the notion that, hey, I'm just really interested in this stuff. I love physics. I love learning about it. And it doesn't feel like work to sit there all day, like doing some math to try to understand a physics problem. It actually feels like I'm enjoying it, right? So putting the effort in seemed easy. I think where I struggled as a scientist were some of the other aspects of being a successful scientist, like not just working on things you're interested in, but working on things that move your little tiny incremental field one step forward, that you can put your name on, that you can use to raise the next grant, to make the next incremental step. This very structured process was a little onerous for me, and I wasn't great at it. Whereas, I think another element for me is the kind of science that I was doing. I was mostly working alone. So I wasn't part of like a big research group that was like, in the lab building this great project and all going to lunch together and then going to happy hour afterwards. It wasn't as social as that. It was very much, I'm doing the research on my own. I'm writing code on my own. I'm working on my own to understand whether this is progress or not, meeting with my advisor once a week, just on my independent project with him. It was lonely, I think. And compared to that, the notion of working with 2 other really, really smart people who were exciting and working on a shared project and having our successes and our failures be shared, things we could both celebrate and commiserate about together, that was very attractive. So I think I was in this position of like, gosh, I love science. I wish I could just do science on my own terms, however I choose to do it. That's clearly not a real job. That's not what being a professor of physics is actually about. I don't know if I like that. Here's this other opportunity. I don't understand it. Therefore, it's attractive and exciting. I'm getting to work with these very incredible people every day. That's socially very uplifting. And yeah, I suppose there was a part of me that, by this time, this is like probably 2008, 2009, like the notion of, being a tech founder and making a bunch of money by selling a business, like that was something that was out there in the ether. And I was like, well, what if that was my life? Like that would be a very satisfying life, coming from being a physics graduate student, earning almost no money, to potentially feeling financially better off. Like that was an attractive possible outcome. So I think we put all those things together. It's almost not so much that I was drawn towards entrepreneurship. I almost feel like I was trying to escape academia. I was just trying to find something I could be better at, and have a better chance of success. I think if I were more disciplined, ironically, I wouldn't have succeeded. I would have stayed as an academic, and maybe I would have been an okay, mediocre physicist somewhere and been enjoying my life. Who knows? But I'm proud of myself for being honest with myself and admitting that I maybe wanted to do something else and make a big transition.
Mate, that's huge words for anybody listening that's like 18 to 25 years of age. And I know they're out there. I know they listen. I meet them at the conferences. I've even had a few of them on the show. And I try to reframe that negative kind of connotation of dropout, right?
Right. Yeah.
There's so much baggage tied up in that because, and especially from an Asian background, right? That's even like, that is such a huge amount of pressure because, as you said, and we all know, we all know about tiger mums and whatever else, but just switching that language from dropout to opt out, it is so empowering because at that age, if you're listening to this right now, you're 22, 23, you're going through the same kind of thoughts and feelings that Dhruv has just outlaid here. Sit back, think about it deeply, and if it's not working, don't opt out. Don't think of it as a dropout, because that's the power of the language that they use over you to keep you where you are. Whereas if you empower yourself and opt out, and if you're listening to this, you likely have some Bitcoin under your belt, which you didn't have at the time, I'm assuming.
No,
No, right, okay.
no.
And we'll get to that story. So yeah, that's that's just one point I wanted to make about that. And people that carry the trauma still, when you meet entrepreneurs, you meet successful people, and they're still carrying that baggage, and they'll still say, "Oh, I dropped out of college when I was XYZ."
Yeah. And I know it does get harder over time. Like I've got a few younger cousins now that are early 20s, and they thought they were going to go do this one thing in life. They've been great successes their whole life. They got into the best schools. They've always had the best grades. They've been overachievers. And now they're, I think, like me, suddenly questioning, like, do I really want to do this thing that I've signed up for? Like, is it really true that I want to be a psychologist or a mechanical engineer or whatever it is that my major was? Like, if I say no to that, well, then suddenly I have all this tremendous decision stress I need to deal with. Like I'm no longer on a path, right? I have to forge my own path. That's terrifying, I think, when you're young. You feel like you're disappointing people, and that you feel like for the first time you don't know what to do next. But also that can be really empowering. And honestly, being young is the time to do it. I'm now 40 years old, and I do have some friends who, they've gone into medicine, or they've gone into law, or they've gone into these fields that they felt were really like concrete, like clear paths, right? You climb this ladder. Now they're having kids, and they're realizing, oh my God, I don't think I want to be in this career for another 25 years till retirement, right? Like, yeah, they're making great money. They, in theory, they enjoy their work, but they're yearning for something that they're not getting, right? And it's very hard when you're, 40 years old with a family to support, to say, screw it, I'm opting out of my entire profession, or I'm going to go do something completely new. That's the risk of that is just, it can be prohibitive. So I'm happy that I listened to myself when I was 25 instead of waiting to be 40 years old and feeling like I've made a mistake.
Well done. So you start the company, and where does Bitcoin come into this whole story? Like,
it's funny because I think that I was making those decisions right around 2008, 2009, which of course is when Bitcoin was being launched, but I didn't know anything about Bitcoin. I had never heard of it. I was not in the right mailing lists. Part of me laughs and is like, well, what if I had known about it and had started my Bitcoin business with Joe in that era instead of whatever it is we did? Obviously, I don't think I would have done that. I wasn't prepared to understand or appreciate Bitcoin in any way at all. I didn't have money. I didn't have experience building applications. I didn't understand distributed systems. So it would have it wouldn't have registered with me. So the business that I did start with Joe in 2008 was more of a data-oriented business around trying to make data easier to work with for businesses and researchers. Very much came out of my own experiences as a scientist. Like sometimes you'll hear this said, but it's like sometimes the hardest part of a research project is collecting and aggregating and normalizing and cleaning and fixing the data. That might take you 90% of the time. And now you have this wonderful clean data. Okay, great. You run your analysis, you get your paper, you're done. And so I felt like scientists at the time didn't appreciate or didn't act as though they acted as though that last 10% was the hard part, when really it was the 90% of free work, getting the data prepared and ready, that was the hard part. So this business Joe and I started was all about making it easier for businesses and individuals to find, access, improve, post, share, and maybe even monetize data that they had created. So it was an interesting idea. It wasn't very successful as a business originally because I think as scientists, we're a lot of us had science backgrounds building that business. As scientists, we sort of saw this problem, but businesses, it turns out, like their problem is not like finding more data. Their problem is we already have too much data and none of us know how to analyze it well. So buying more data from some online system is not attractive. Like hiring people to work with our data and improve our existing that's attractive. So it was an interesting pivot for us in the business to kind of move away from the notion of like an online data marketplace more directly into the notion of being a data services provider. So instead of trying to sell a business a really cool piece of data that we had found online that we think might help them, we just work with them to improve their supply chain, or build an insurance analysis application for them, or do quality assurance on their manufacturing line, or things like this. That was the real value that first business wound up unlocking. But interestingly, soup to nuts, we started the business in 2008. We got it funded in 2010, and we sold it in 2013. So 5-year journey, like pretty fast on the whole. And I made some money for the first time in my life. That was an amazing experience. Got to say I'm an entrepreneur with an exit.
yeah.
But what did I do? Like somewhere during that 5-year journey, I had encountered Bitcoin. So I recall being at just an open source tech conference in Portland somewhere, maybe around 2011. And I ran into like really my first real world Bitcoiner that I had ever met. And he was like, "Hey, there's this thing Bitcoin. Let me explain to you how it works." Like da 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 da. And it was fun for me because I had learned enough about decentralized and distributed systems like databases or stream processing engines and whatnot. So I sort of understood that like doing things in a centralized way is easy, frankly. But doing things in these distributed fashions, it causes a lot of problems. There's lots of ancillary concerns like coordination. How do you make sure different parts of the system see the same truth, right? The notion of consensus was already something I understood was difficult to achieve in distributed systems. So I looked at Bitcoin really like a distributed system, like a database or something. And I was like, oh, this seems like a really bad design. Like I sort of agree that like, okay, in theory, this can work in a decentralized way. I actually understood a lot of the decentralized aspects of Bitcoin, the digital computer system, a lot more than I understood the value proposition of Bitcoin as a new kind of money, right? Which I think I just answered that as the very first question. What's so important about Bitcoin? What's a new kind of money? I did not have that perspective in 2011. I didn't have any money. I didn't understand money, where it came from, what good was it. I sort of basically, I think I came to the conclusion that a lot of people come to when they first hear about Bitcoin, which is like, wow, it seems really complicated and clever, but like, what could you ever use it for? It seems kind of pointless. So like, almost like a Rube Goldberg machine, right? Or an esoteric programming language where it's like, the goal is not to accomplish things. The goal is to just explore an interesting little problem space, a very academic kind of pursuit. So of course I was totally wrong, but Bitcoin also it barely had a price in that era, right? It was, I think 2011 Coinbase doesn't exist. Like most exchanges don't exist. There's maybe Mt. Gox is around. I don't remember, but Bitcoin does not really have a real market price as far as I'm concerned. It's a curiosity in that era. And I remember just a couple of years later in 2013, I had sold my business at this point. I made a little bit of money and I checked in on Bitcoin randomly and it was now like $100-something a coin. And I was like, what? How is that possible? Like, it surely can't be the case that in 2 years, like all these, people have appreciated the Rube Goldberg clever computer science aspects of this technology and they're buying it for that reason. Like, that doesn't seem correct. It must be because they're actually using it to, I don't know, buy drugs on Silk Road or whatever it is they're doing with it. Like, and then of course that's prompted the notion like, oh my God, if people are using this like actual money, it might work. It might actually become money. I should buy some. I'm probably too late. Like I probably missed the boat on this, but I should buy a little bit. So yeah, I bought a little bit of Bitcoin in 2013 at a few $100s a coin. It immediately went up to $1,000. I thought I was the smartest investor in the world. And then it immediately cratered again, back down to 200, basically the price that I bought it at. And I was like, well, I guess that happened. I'm happy that I only bought a little bit of Bitcoin. I think if I had bought a whole bunch of it, I would have freaked out and I would have sold it all and I would have become anti-Bitcoin for a few years because it would have been an ego bruise for me. But I only bought a little bit. And so when it went down, I was like, okay, well, lesson learned. Maybe don't buy, magic beans on the internet. But sure enough, after a couple of years, I had that experience of like, so that Bitcoin that I bought that I thought was good, then went back down, it's coming back up again. Oh my God, it didn't die. Like I thought it was going to die. It didn't die. That made me pay real attention to it. I think when I first purchased it, like everybody else, I was just trying to make a speculative investment. But by 2015 or so, I was like, there's something more to this than what I thought it was. Like this is actually really interesting, the fact that it hasn't died yet. Like, why hasn't it died? And then that was like, we didn't have the expression quite at the time, but like that was really when I fell down the rabbit hole, right? Then I was like, how does it actually work? Like, how would I model it inside of a computer? Can I like explain to myself this property that it has? It's probably the first time around 2014, 15 is probably when I first understood like things like, for example, the difficulty adjustment algorithm or what a UTXO is or the data structure of a block. Like this is when I first started to actually learn those details. Unchained is I think well known for having popularized the HODL waves kind of chart. It's something that originally a researcher named John Ratcliffe on Twitter produced and posted it on Reddit. And I was like, this is the most interesting plot I've ever seen in my life. But it only goes up to like 2011. I want to remake this plot and have it go up to 2016 or so, the present day. And so we did. So I learned a lot about Bitcoin by just trying to analyze the blockchain and reproduce this HODL waves plot for the first time and convince myself that I understood how it worked. And then Joe and I were shocked when we made this plot because we sort of knew that people don't use their Bitcoin for anything. Like we had Bitcoin by that point, and it was just sitting on Coinbase. We weren't doing anything with it. And so, but to see in that HODL waves chart, which we created, like, wow, 60% of all Bitcoin has just been sitting there for like years. That was very interesting, because I think that told me, well, if we believe two things, if we believe that Bitcoin is becoming a kind of money, it's actually succeeding, and therefore it's worthwhile to hold it. Well, what are the things that, wrap around money? Okay, well, there's custody and wallets and the ability to buy and sell Bitcoin, but like there have to be financial services, there have to be loans, there have to be retirement products, there have to be like insurance, tax advantaged products. Like none of those existed in the market. And so this is where we started the synthesis for Unchained, is because then we started to poke at that point, and we started to find anybody we knew who was willing to admit to us that they had a significant amount of Bitcoin, because we really didn't. Right? We had only bought a tiny amount, and whatever. Bitcoin wasn't a huge part of our portfolios at that time personally, so it wasn't like we were ourselves necessarily looking for financial products in Bitcoin. We just had a little bit, but yeah, we met early Bitcoin owners, Dustin Trammell, who later wound up building Trammell Ventures, an early investor in Unchained, was based in Austin where we were. So we wound up talking with Dustin early. He had a whole bunch of Bitcoin even in that era. And we remember asking him like, hey, would you ever take out a loan? Would you ever be interested in a retirement account? Would you ever do these following? Just doing the customer interviews that as an entrepreneur, you kind of need to do to make sure that your business has some kind of legs on it. And I think by 2016 or so, we convinced ourselves like, first of all, Bitcoin is probably never going to go away. It probably is here to stay. I think I was still maybe willing to say that there might be a better version of Bitcoin built. I could still probably in that era believe that claim. But regardless, we felt like Bitcoin was interesting and worth investing in, not just to own it, but to build a business around it. And then it became clear to us that the opportunity, at least for us, was to try to build something in financial services. So that it maybe catches up to about 2016, when we were like, okay, we're going to start a business. We're going to build financial services for Bitcoin owners. We didn't know yet which was the first financial service that we wanted to launch. It turned out to be a Bitcoin collateralized lending product, which we launched in 2017 in beta and hit GA towards the end of that year. And I don't think we fully understood the picture of what the next 5 to 6 years might look like. But broadly, I think we were correct. Like we wanted to build a product that targeted high net worth Bitcoiners, provided them financial services with great quality and safety and security and great customer service experience, something that they wouldn't be able to get elsewhere from a Coinbase or other firms. And that's pretty much what we have built at Unchained. And I'm happy and proud that we've gone way past just Bitcoin collateralized lending. We have a very successful vault product that, almost 100,000 Bitcoin at this point are protected in collaborative custody through this vault product that we've built. We've got retirement accounts. We're helping folks with inheritance. We're launching all sorts of new verticals over time to really build a suite of financial services for high net worth Bitcoiners, all provided through very strong and unique custodial approach, collaborative custody. So on some level, I sort of have to pinch myself and be like, oh my God, I can't believe we've actually come this far, that our business is actually real and growing and has clients who love us. Like, I feel very honored about that. But on another level, I'm like, yeah, we pretty much called it. Like, this is what we said we wanted to build. And so here we are, like executing on the vision that we more or less outlined in 2016. There are some differences. I recently was looking at some 2016 era fundraising decks for Unchained, which is of course super nostalgic and fun. And there's some funny lines, because you got to remember at that point, the entire Bitcoin market cap is less than $10 billion, right? So the notion that you can build a venture-backed financial services company over on an asset class that's only worth $8 billion or whatever, that was hard to swallow. And so those early decks have us saying things like, well, we're going to put all sorts of stuff on the blockchain, right? We're going to put corporate assets and stocks and bonds and jewelry and real estate and cars. And I don't believe those things so much anymore, or at least not as literally as I would have put it back then. So we definitely had some mistaken ideas about where growth would come from. But yeah, overall, we identified early in around 2016 the notion that if Bitcoin is money, well, then you need robust financial services. Let's go out and deliver those.
Do you remember the resources that you were leaning on at that point when you were falling down the rabbit hole and just trying to consume as much as you possibly could?
Yeah, it was a different vibe, right? Like I
Mm,
think right now there are so many more resources available. Like the podcast ecosystem is huge. There's so many like great podcasts around Bitcoin. Moreover, I think there's actually a Bitcoin focused like media, sector now, like distinct from cryptocurrency, which I'm sure your listeners understand the distinction. That wasn't really around in that era. Like Bitcoin maximalism as a term hadn't really been coined or thought of. Ethereum didn't exist, so there was not really a need, arguably, to talk about like the altcoin, like altcoins like that. There was like Namecoin and stuff that was like doesn't exist anymore, right? So it was a very different information landscape. Um, I think for me, some of the most useful resources were technical ones because I was still very much just trying to understand Bitcoin itself, especially if you're trying to build a business and you're like, well, I have to interface with the blockchain somehow. I have to like learn how to build transactions and I have to learn about keys and all these things. For me, technical knowledge was the knowledge I was most hungry for. Um, so I actually I actually did not learn probably as much as I should have about things like, I don't know, the Federal Reserve. I don't think, for example, it was probably until 2018 or so that I understood that the Federal Reserve is not part of the US government, right? At least literally.
right.
I did not know this fact. So for me, that those first early years were very much technical learnings. The resources I found super helpful were uh, um, sorry, Mastering Bitcoin, right? Incredible textbook that like really walked you through like how does a Bitcoin transaction work and look. Um, there were other couple of technical resources that me and our first engineers found online. There was a great resource. I wonder if I can pull it up here quickly. Kind of called Doing a Bitcoin Transaction the Hard Way, I think, or something like that. I'm not forgetting who wrote that, which is terrible, but it was basically like, say you didn't have a computer and you needed to go through and make by hand a Bitcoin transaction. You need to do all the cryptography by hand. Like, what would you do? Like, what are the actual algorithms? How do they work? Let's just do them out by hand. That was huge for me. It's a really like, you kind of learn by doing, like really taught me like, okay, what is going on inside of this complicated machine that I'm trying to master. So that was super helpful. I also definitely need to shout out Jameson Lopp, who's if you go to lopp.net, there's an incredible list of Bitcoin resources on there that he's maintained basically this entire time. But even in the 2016 era, like that was full of great resources. So Jameson has been like a huge influence on my personal understanding of Bitcoin. Trying to think what else. I think over time, what started to happen is I stopped thinking of Bitcoin as a technology because I suppose I had mastered like at least the basics of like what is a transaction, how do private keys work, what is a redeem script. I began to understand that technological aspect of it, and it was maybe less interesting to me. And what became more interesting was, okay, but both Bitcoin, the money, like let's talk about that. Let's think about the impact that that has. And it took maybe until 2017, 2018, I think, before I personally was kind of at the point of, yeah, I don't think these other coins matter, right? Like
Right.
Unchained during that era, we launched with Bitcoin support for our products. And then in 2018, we launched Ethereum support. And that was driven because people were asking for it. Our investors were saying, "Hey, Ethereum's really, about to flip Bitcoin or whatever, right? Like, you should support Ethereum." Our clients were saying, "Hey, you should support Ethereum." And when clients ask you for things, you build those things, right? I personally owned Ethereum at that point. I had bought a little bit of Ethereum somewhere on the way up. So I was like, "Yeah, of course, this is the future of cryptocurrency, right? It's going to be multiple coins. Bitcoin is gold, and Ethereum is oil, or whatever analogies were operating in that era." It wasn't until me and our team actually worked with Ethereum and we ran parity nodes and we wrote smart contracts and we really approached it like with the same level of care and diligence and carefulness that we approached our Bitcoin architecture and implementations with. And it was very disappointing. I recall Bitcoin nodes, Bitcoin the software, Bitcoin D, the core Bitcoin distribution, I think is one of the best pieces of software I've ever worked with in my entire life. Like in terms of robustness, in terms of uptime, stability. Like it's a great piece of software. We would run our Bitcoin nodes and they would happily just do stuff. We never had to touch them, never had to fix them, poke at them. They're great. Compare that to Ethereum Parity, which was the implementation of the Ethereum node that we were running in that era, it required so much care and feeding. It would constantly be breaking. The Ethereum community is constantly upgrading all the time. And so parity by default in that era was auto upgrading. So it would just upgrade itself on the fly. I found that to be a security problem. I don't like when software has the capability to upgrade itself. That's my responsibility as the software operator. At least for professional institutional software, like this isn't, uh, some little chat app that you've installed that needs to update itself, right? This is the core backbone of what my business relies upon. Like I want to be in control of this. So I disabled those capabilities, but then that leads to other problems. If you don't upgrade your parity node consistently, it falls out of sync with the entire network. That's crazy. That never happens in Bitcoin. There are lots of like brittleness and design problems and things like this that we started to observe when we actually got into Ethereum, development. And it terrified us. I think we were like, we don't like this at all. Like, this is not good. Like the amount of work we have to do to get something to work in Bitcoin versus get the same thing to work in Ethereum at the same level of quality just felt so much more. Like now, in theory, yes, Ethereum was more expressive. We could write more complex things. But as a business, we weren't seeking complexity. We were seeking safety and security and predictability. And so we weren't utilizing all the complex aspects of what a smart contract could possibly ever do. And I think to our credit, that was a good decision. That was an era in which a lot of smart contracts, specifically smart contracts related to Ethereum multisig, like were famously hacked. A lot of money was lost in that era because of what I now view as overly complex implementations of multisig, which is a very simple capability in Bitcoin that works beautifully. And Ethereum was overcomplicated to the extent where the contracts themselves became security holes. That's not what we were searching for. And so I think after a couple of years, we just decided there was a strong technical belief on the team that like, we don't want to do this anymore. Like this is wasting our time and not reliable and it creates a risk for ourselves. And then moreover, I think when we looked at the business, we were like, look, like 95 to 98% of our revenues and our clients and our assets are still in Bitcoin. It's a tiny percentage of people that are coming to us for Ethereum products. They're not worth supporting. Basically, is the conclusion that we made. Like the technical risk, the fact that we have to duplicate our efforts to get something to work with Ethereum in addition to Bitcoin, and the relatively small number of clients we were able to win in the Ethereum space, it just didn't make sense for us anymore. And we deprecated all Ethereum stuff in about 2019, and we have never looked back. And I'm very happy about that. I think it was it's an important decision for us to make. I would hate to right now be in a position where I had to support Ethereum and Solana and the next thing and the next thing after that. I think it would have steered my business off in a direction that I don't want to be in. I think staying with Bitcoin, it focuses us on the real problem, right? Which is that we have to change the money, and we need really reliable money. It can't be bullshit money that freezes because they've decided to like make some fix. It can't be move fast and break things. It has to be, if it's going to be the foundation of the entire global economy, it can literally never ever break. And as a developer, how do you build software that never ever breaks? You make the scope like tiny and you stop changing it. That's the only solution. There's no other way to achieve that outcome. I couldn't see that story playing out in Ethereum land because, software on some level, complex software, begs for us to continue to develop it, right? It says, hey, please add this feature. You'll get an incrementally additional set of users, or you'll be able to tackle more use cases. So in some sense, it tricks us, right? Software tricks us into wanting to continue to extend it to make it bigger and bigger and better over time. And in some sense, this leads to like enshittification of software. Like I think on the longest time scales that all your favorite software becomes so bloated and terrible over time because people have decided to continue to keep developing on it. It's very rare that software solutions tend to freeze with limited functionality that just works perfectly, and we never have to go back and update it. In fact, the only software that really seems to develop on that kind of a direction is mission critical software that everyone agrees actually can never ever break. And so I was kind of looking at the overall ecosystem. I'm like, okay, so here you have Bitcoin that it looks to me is really trying to be mission critical software. It has a tiny scope. It is not Turing complete. Like, you don't have to constantly upgrade your nodes. It's not move fast and break things. It's reliable. And then here you have everything else. Everything else is competing for hey, how many features can we get? Like, how advanced is our smart contracting capabilities? How superficially capable can we make dApps and other applications look so that we can get investment from Silicon Valley or whomever else, right? Like, this was not like going to work. And I think I felt that very deeply in my bones in 2018, 19, when I was like trying to work in that environment. And man, I am glad I walked away from it.
Mm. And you guys had a front row seat at seeing the malinvestment, right? The money that was chasing after those incremental software upgrades or the next shiny thing or the next big thing, that the money that has been absolutely flushed down the pan or into the pockets of bad actors is incredible.
That's more correct. Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
No,
into the pockets of bad actors. And you can see that in shitcoin land, because that's all it is. I mean, and you clearly came to the distinction of money, right? You came for the money and stayed for the money, right? The classic journey. Like, right, there's money to be made here. Let's get in. Let's start investing. Let's try and make some mad gains. Oh shit, this is actual money. Like, this is mission critical money. And this changes everything, like absolutely everything. So if you've got that on your side, but yeah, why would you be spinning the plates of Ethereum nodes, knowing full well that there's some weird, dark, and shady shit going on behind the scenes there?
Yeah, and it's been interesting too to watch in the altcoin community, like a microcosm of this kind of battle play out. Like, I don't follow too much of it, but I do see it occasionally where, you'll have an Ethereum champion kind of criticizing the Solana project, being like, well, that thing just looks better than us because it's less decentralized, right? They have only this many servers, and that's why it can move so fast and do all these great things. And really, Ethereum is more decentralized, and that's why you should value it more. That's why it's a better solution. And I'm just like, that is exactly the argument we all had 3 years ago, man. Like, if this is your stance, like, surely you should turn around and look at Bitcoin and realize that it's even more decentralized, it's even more predictable, it's even more robust. And if money is what matters, well, but Bitcoin is really the money. I think there's a little bit of a kind of a race to the bottom, right? That happens as soon as you're like, well, I want to compete on features, and I'm willing to sacrifice monetary properties and decentralization in order to compete on features. Well, then someone's just going to compete harder than you and have even more features and even better developer experience and an even more centralized system that can move even faster. That's a race that only has losers in it, I think, at the end. Like, no one wins that race, right? Even if you have the most centralized, feature-full environment, okay, now you're, I don't know, IBM Hyperledger, or you're a corporate coin, or you're something that has no broad-scale public appeal. So it just feels like the wrong thing to be optimizing for.
For sure. And not only has all of that money been malinvested, but all of the talent has been malinvested too. And this is such a crazy, awful thing to sit back and watch and ponder, because you have some incredibly smart, talented people working on a fucking scam.
Or so I think in some cases very much working on a scam. I think in other cases just working on a project that will ultimately fail. It's just their work isn't sustainable, and that's very sad. Like that, in some sense, that's even more sad, right? Because I think those people are well intentioned. I don't personally believe that everyone who's interested in altcoins or Ethereum or whatever are scammers. Maybe a significant percentage, perhaps. I think most of them just, especially if you're coming out of computer science or programming or systems engineering, kind of like I was, it's, you want the thing that has the better API. You want the thing that lets you build what you want to build. And it's hard to realize that in building this thing, I've actually hollowed out the very core of the value proposition that it's for, because actually it only runs in a centralized context. And I haven't actually replaced the global market for X with a decentralized equivalent. I've just built another centralized version of that market. That is, it's harder to see that, right? As a developer, like, writing code is fun. So it's cool to be able to write a smart contract, deploy it to the Ethereum network, and it just works, right? To a degree. Except, well, of course, it doesn't really just work, because as soon as it starts to scale and be successful, then you get all sorts of problems happening. You get centralization concerns, you get all sorts of difficulties. I think for me, I just fundamentally view it as a decentralized market structure that Satoshi designed to support the requirements of a money cannot just be repurposed to support the requirements of arbitrary computing at scale. Like you should not expect like the structures that were built to support a very fine-grained, finely scoped problem of money to apply to general problems. Like that's a naive hope to me now at this point. And I think the folks who think of blockchain as like the innovation or whatever, and we need a more powerful blockchain, we need a more expressive blockchain, that completely misunderstood that point. That the blockchain was a very specific kind of data structure designed to solve a coordination problem for a very narrow problem, for the narrow use case of trying to build a functioning decentralized money. You're not going to be able to get it to do arbitrary things for you. And I think the big rant or series of thoughts that I've been engaged in over the last couple of years, still trying to bring some of these thoughts into written form formally, is just the notion that like it's the market behind Bitcoin that is the most important thing. It's not the blockchain. It's not even the cryptography. It's the notion that the market is very strong, that people want to earn Bitcoin and they will earn it by doing proof of work mining, by selling computations back to the Bitcoin network. And that is low barrier to entry. Anybody can get started. It's impossible to stop them from doing it, which means, of course, this market will grow incredibly quickly. And to me, like that's the magic part of Bitcoin, is that we've been able to build a system which acts as a market that draws in service providers, that at the same time is impossible to surveil, regulate, corrupt. That's very powerful. That's the thing we need to bring to these other sectors, right? So I've been trying to like put out content that is like, look, if you're an altcoin person and the thing that animates you is not, Austrian economics or the money supply or whatever, like that's okay. Like that, frankly, those weren't things that drew me into Bitcoin either originally. If what animates you is the notion that like you want the internet to be more fundamentally free and open, or you want supply chains to be better, more transparent and less prone to attack, or you care deeply about political representation and making sure that that is properly endowed and apportioned across people in a given polity or whatever it is. If these are your concerns, well, realize that you're talking about a market problem, right? Like you want to replace a centralized or centrally operated human network with something that is more decentralized, that no one can control, that no one is in charge of. By definition, such a system has to be market driven. Like this is a lesson I learned from Ryan Gentry. Like when we say decentralized, we actually mean market driven. That's the real meaning of decentralization, because without markets to enforce and incentivize rules and behavior, the system just doesn't work at all. And your only two choices in the world of networks seem to be strong central regulation and governance, or strong economic incentives that lead to very robust markets. And so the questions we need to be asking ourselves are, well, if I want the internet to be more free and open, what kinds of markets do I need to build in order to guarantee that outcome? The answer is not, what features does my blockchain need in order to create that outcome? That's cargo culting, right? Sort of assuming that the solution looks a certain way, hoping that if you build that the market will just magically materialize. And it will not. I think you need to very deeply think about what are the actual concerns that the market needs to solve, and you need to engineer incentives and trades and solutions that solve that problem. I think the one-liner that I can give that really, I think, summarizes my line of thinking at this point is, Satoshi taught us that if we want to provide services or solve problems in a decentralized way, then we need to take that service or that problem and we need to break it down into sub-problems, each of which is so small, simple, and straightforward that we actually can get a market to solve it. And I think with the notion of Bitcoin and releasing the initial supply of Bitcoin, having Bitcoin transactions with finality, these are problems that are really tiny. And what I keep saying about do all the world's computing, like that's too big of a problem. You'll never be able to build one market that works very simply and predictably and robustly and scalably that solves that massive problem of arbitrary computation. It's too big of a problem. You need to break it down, right? And I think that's the Bitcoin methodology in a nutshell. Like we've solved the problem of how to issue and release money. We've solved the problem of how to make transactions with that money. We're beginning to solve the problems of how to make transactions at scale quickly with that money through things like Lightning and Layers 2s. The adjacent problems that follow on from this are like networking problems. How do we find a route to everybody quickly on the Lightning network so that we can quickly exchange money with them? Availability problems, like how do we know that liquidity is even present? Like, to me, these are the market problems that are small enough that we might have a chance to solve them. And if we're able to solve these problems, what's great is we're increasing the capabilities of our overall ecosystem. We're not doing it inside of a smart contract or a blockchain. We're doing it through many layers of coupled markets. That's how the actual economy works, right? So we're bringing that insight into the way that Bitcoin chooses to solve these problems. And fundamentally, I believe whether it is real estate on the blockchain or whatever, or whether it's political representation or tracking supply chains or whatever else it is, I think those problems can be solved. They won't be solved on the blockchain, but they will be solved through markets that are designed to provide those services, and those markets will settle through many, many layers, all of which operate on Bitcoin. That's a very big and exciting, sexy vision to me. I think I'm underperforming by not really laying it out in as clean of a way as I possibly could. It's a hard concept to really get through the details of. And I think unless you spent a lot of time thinking and really trying to deeply understand what is it that Bitcoin achieved, like, and it's easy to think that I'm just talking bullshit, that at the end of the day, like, these are technological problems and therefore they require technological solutions, and therefore we must build more powerful software. That's a very natural impulse. I just think that that's wrong.
Well, if you have the perfect money, then everything else can start building up from there, right?
Well, the perfect money lets you create very strong incentives.
Right.
And the strength of those incentives is ultimately what drives the quality of the market. So the weaker your money, the less likely you are to be able to build strong markets in it, regardless of how computationally expressive the platform you're using may be. That's a red herring. In fact, I think it's a danger. The more computationally expressive the system becomes, the more holes it has, the less robust it becomes. Turing halting problems and all these kinds of notions that they become hard to predict. And if they're hard to predict, they're hard to engineer. If they're hard to engineer, they won't be robust. So to me, it's like we need a very opposite orientation here. We need to start from the bottom and build upwards instead of starting from the very top and assuming that we can drill down to build the services that we require.
What about wizard JPEGs on the blockchain?
I never think about it.
Good.
It doesn't bother me, and I think it's a stupid problem. Who cares? Like,
right.
Part of me just feels like, especially on Bitcoin Twitter, there's just a need to fight about stuff, right? That tribal need that we all have to, like, identify on one side and argue with the other side. Like, it manifests in these areas. Like, do I think the wizard JPEGs and NFTs I think that shit will exist eventually. I think it's impossible for it not to exist. Clearly, there's some market interest in having these kinds of things around. Am I surprised that people are trying to do it now? Like, no, of course they're going to try. Are they polluting the blockchain with unnecessary data? Yeah, probably. Yeah, they are. But they're paying the market rate to do that. Is it a huge mistake that we've enabled this capability? Like, kind of no. Like, I think no matter what, there would be some way to embed data, and there always was, like, null outputs and so on. The whole thing seems very overblown to me, because all that needs to happen is that Bitcoin needs to become more valuable, and trading in Bitcoin for real things needs to become more desirable. And then the cost point will just be blown out, and no one will be able to afford to spend money on these kinds of use cases. I think the problem solves itself eventually. And I think the worst thing you could do as a Bitcoiner is be so worried about this problem that you start to, like, poke at and make holes and break the thing that was already working.
That's the worry. Yeah, that's the worry for me.
Yeah.
That the community gets divided and upgrades, in air quotes, get made to the Bitcoin blockchain. That needs to be resisted. Because we've been through a 2-year war before, and that was not fun.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's terrifying as a Bitcoiner, because I personally am kind of the mind that, like, the notion of ossification is an important ideal. Like, I stated earlier, the only way to build perfect software is to stop changing it eventually. So it must ossify at some point. But with that said, I still think there's work to do in the Bitcoin protocol to get it right. I don't think the work is around better filters and stuff for data inputs. I think that's an economic problem, not a technical one. But I do think, for example, quantum computing, like, this is a real threat that will rear its head sometime in the next 10 to 15 years. Like, as Bitcoiners, we cannot hide from this. Like, it is going to happen. We are probably one of the first communities that will be impacted. Like, when real quantum computers exist at scale, like, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to steal Bitcoin as much as they can. Like, of course that's going to happen. I suspect that post-quantum computing is one of the things that Bitcoiners will operationalize. Like, it's already invented. Academics already did that. It's out there. There's an incredible lattice-based encryption process that is like, I think, very suitable potentially for this. But truthfully, the reason that we don't have post-quantum computing is because quantum computers don't really exist and no one really cares, right? But like when those two things are both negated, when quantum computers do exist and Bitcoiners really, really deeply care about ensuring that our ability to encrypt and transact securely with Bitcoin remains unmolested, we're going to have to think about this. And I think this is going to require potentially some changes to Bitcoin. And so we're going to be in a governance situation where we've got to solve problems like this, like whether it's how to embed post-quantum cryptography into Bitcoin, or whether it's simple notions like what to do with 1.1 million P2PK coins that Satoshi ostensibly has that are, frankly, a quantum computing bounty right now. I think those are concerns that we have to solve. I don't know what the answers are, but I know that this is a problem we have to solve. So whether it's quantum computing or whether it's some other issue or upgrade that I'm not aware of or thinking about, like Bitcoin has got another couple decades of development work to do. And so we are going to have our fights and our discussions and tribalize and argue it out, and maybe there'll be a fork. I don't even know. That's going to happen. There's only so many of those that as a community we can tolerate, right? It's really hard, especially as the community grows larger, to make changes, period. And so I think that's one of the great strengths of Bitcoin, but it's also, I think potentially it terrifies Bitcoiners because some Bitcoiners don't want to admit that we have these problems ahead of us that we have to solve because there aren't really good methodologies for solving these problems. There isn't a governance board that controls Bitcoin for good reasons. So solving these problems becomes a huge exercise in building support and momentum and education and all these things. And part of me is a little sad to see that effort happening on things that I don't think are that important. Like I don't think the ordinals thing is important enough to be to demand this kind of attention from the overall community. Unfortunately, it's getting a lot of attention because it's pushing people's buttons to a degree. Maybe I'd rather push a different button, which is like, guys, like what is going to happen in 5 years when Google announces their next big breakthrough in quantum computing? Like, are we prepared for that? Frankly, quantum computing is going to break so many things in the world. Like, obviously, it's not just Bitcoin that will suffer, but Bitcoin, I think, is probably one of the first things that will be attacked. And Bitcoiners probably are more motivated than any other constituency to try to solve this problem. Like, I sometimes think that, like devices like a Trezor or a Ledger or these could have existed 30 years ago, right? We had RSA dongles and stuff 30 years ago, but like we didn't build those things because there wasn't a general need for them until Bitcoin existed. So Bitcoin is a phenomenon that has now caused sophisticated cryptographic signing devices to show up in the pockets of dentists around the world, right? That's an incredible outcome. I think similarly, Bitcoin can be the thing that causes quantum computing, or sorry, post-quantum computing to actually become operationalized and realized in the world. Unsurprisingly, because we care about it the most. So I don't know. I think there's so much change coming. I prefer to save our budget for arguing and governance problems for the really, really important changes that we have to handle. Maybe not waste it on the stuff that just doesn't seem that actionable to me.
All right, fingers crossed, mate. That yeah, everything. Well, and as we said, there's going to be a lot of talent attracted to the Bitcoin space. All that talent that is currently in the other altcoiny space will. I mean, these are smart people. They'll see the light, and we need more hands on deck. We need more unchains. We need more. We just need more of everything.
Yeah.
More thought, more capabilities, more talent, more companies, and yeah, more robustness, and way more layer 2 solutions to help.
I personally cannot wait for the era of layer 2 scams on Bitcoin. I think a lot of the elements that have been scamming and building craptastic layer 1 chains that no one's ever going to use, they will find a second life when they come to Bitcoin and get to build, hey, this is Arc or it's Lightning, but it's better and it has its own token. And you can just play the exact same playbook again on layer 2. And I think people will do it. And I look forward to that day.
Yeah, I think it's already started. Joe Nakamoto tweeted something out today. I can't remember what it was. There's some layer 2 Tron solution or something. Is like, yeah. So yeah, look out. Stay vigilant, people. Stay vigilant and educate your friends and family and those around you. I want to ask you a physics question because Saylor dropped onto the scene. Still his first cycle. Can you believe that?
What an impact to make your first one around, right?
It's unbelievable, right? yeah, he's going to end up being known as first cycle Michael. I think he's going to go down
I
in
like that.
history. The amount he's stacked and the amount, the big impact he's had on the amount of orange pilling that he's managed to do through all of his interviews on Pleb pods and all the way up to
Mhm.
CNN and Squawk Box and whatever. But then he's in some of his interviews, he started dropping like physics references, the thermodynamics, right? The third law of thermodynamics. And I know you're a physicist, and I know you've written, but how many part series is that one on thermodynamics on the
I,
Unchained
I
blog?
I think I tried to inject it into an analysis of dust, like the notion
Right.
that we create dust when we transact in Bitcoin. It's in some sense a thermodynamic inevitability or something like that.
Can you,
But yeah,
for us educated plebs in the world of the first law of how many laws of thermodynamics, those of us that didn't study physics, can you talk us through like the analogy that's being made, like the one that you're trying to make, the one that Saylor's trying to make, and all get us up to speed on where that
mhm.
thought process is coming from, and how it is applied to Bitcoin.
Yeah. So I guess there are, depends on how you count them. Three, maybe four laws of thermodynamics that are widely believed in. There's even a fifth one that some folks try to work on. It's interesting, and they start from zero instead of one, which I like. There's a
Interesting.
zeroth law, which is not often stated, but I think is important to state. The zeroth law really just talks about transitivity of thermodynamic equilibrium, and it really it's a law that says thermometers can exist. That's a way to think about what the zeroth law says. The first law is about energy conservation. So energy is always conserved in physical systems, more or less. The second law is a very deeply interesting philosophical law about entropy and the direction of time and inefficiency and so on. That was the law I was trying to point at a little bit in some of my articles from years ago, saying that like any methodology for managing UTXOs in a wallet inevitably is going to result in some number of dust outputs eventually, and that this is totally inevitable. And to me, this is in some sense reminiscent of thermodynamics, that there is no such thing as a perfectly efficient engine. Every engine creates waste heat. And so I think every wallet management strategy creates these waste or dust UTXOs. In fact, Bitcoin as a whole has to create these dust UTXOs just to operate. So that was like an analogy that I was trying to create. The third law of thermodynamics is variously pointed at as a law establishing the existence of absolute zero in the temperature scale. So like negative, 273 degrees Celsius or whatever being the lowest temperature you can reach. Sometimes it's connected to specific heats, which is how much energy you've got to put in something to heat it up by a degree. That one maybe gets less attention, from philosophically, but I think it has some deep importance. The fourth law of thermodynamics, which is really the fifth law, if you include zero, I think is the most
Yes.
interesting one. It doesn't really exist. No one has ever really articulated it, but it has something to do with self-organization. That despite the fact that there's a second law saying that the universe tends towards ever greater entropy and inefficiency and so on, yet somehow life seems to very, very reliably take hold here on this earth. Quickly in the Earth's history. So what's that all about? Why do systems seem to get more complicated and capable over time, inevitably? So that's a really super interesting law for me, especially from the perspective of Bitcoin. For Saylor, I won't put in words in his mouth as to what he was trying to say thermodynamically, but I will say that for him, I think there's a strong connection that he draws between Bitcoin and energy. And I think that is a very deep connection. I think for years I maybe walked around saying similar things that like, hey, Bitcoin is just energy money, or Bitcoin is energy made into money. That somehow it's a way, I think, when you first approach Bitcoin to sort of square yourself with the fact that Bitcoin doesn't seem to have any kind of intrinsic or inherent value. It's just made up. So you tell yourself, well, it can't just be made up because we use energy to make it, right? So in some sense, all the energy that the miners are using all the time is in some sense, I don't know, transmogrified into Bitcoins. Like that's like an intuitive picture that I certainly had at one point in my Bitcoin journey. I think goes back to Buckminster Fuller even a little bit, like the notion of an energy-based money is like a compelling notion in the middle of last century. And as a physicist, I'm very excited about energy as the basis for economics. It just strikes me as thermodynamically very sensible, et cetera, et cetera. And I know that Saylor has, I don't know if he quite literally, but like has promoted these notions, right? That energy and Bitcoin are deeply connected. And I don't dispute that. I think that they are, but I no longer walk around myself, at least, thinking that Bitcoin is energy. I don't think that's the correct connective between the two concepts. They are not the same thing. One is not made from the other really in any way at all. I think Bitcoins are sold for energy. That's it. So the market for Bitcoin mining is the market of all Bitcoin users collectively, based on a consensus rule, selling Bitcoins to the industry of global Bitcoin miners who are buying those Bitcoins with computations, which are really just the application of energy. So I wouldn't say that, I no longer would say that Bitcoin is made of energy or is energy or anything like that. I would say Bitcoin is sold for energy. That's, I think, a powerful distinction, because I think, first of all, it changes the concept of, oh, well, Bitcoin is inefficient because you have to use so much energy to make just a little bit of Bitcoin, right? Like, that seems bad. Like, surely you could make it more efficient, right? Like, efficiency in our usage of energy is usually called progress. But in some sense, in Bitcoin, if we spent less energy on it, it would somehow retard progress, right? So to me, that's not the right way to think about it. The better way to think about it is that Bitcoins are being sold for energy. And so if they're sold for a lot of energy, that's just because Bitcoins are really fucking valuable. And that's how much energy it took for the market to decide to part with those Bitcoins. I prefer that framing because it's no longer, therefore, about efficiency. It's just about market value. So if something is worth a certain amount, well, that's just what the market is willing to pay for that thing. And we shouldn't try to put our thumbs on the scale and change the price, because that's going to have, negative consequences, all sorts of other places in an economy. We should just accept that this is the going rate of exchange between energy and money. And I think that's pretty interesting.
You've definitely turned it on its head there. And I've never thought of it like that, because my dumb brain just goes straight to the miners are incentivized by the block reward. And
absolutely.
And the fees are just like an extra added bonus. But I think what I'm hearing you say is, like, the way they should be thinking about it is looking at the fees first, because that is you. If I make a transaction, I am selling X amount of Bitcoin in that transaction, so that transaction is freely made, and I'm rewarding. Well, I'm selling my Bitcoin to the miners for them to do the computation.
There's a nuance here. I just published a piece on this, and I'll be writing more about it, but I actually view the market, because remember, I'm a big believer in Bitcoin is just markets. So I kind of view the market for the initial release of the Bitcoin supply into circulation, which is to say the block reward, as a very distinct market from the market for transaction settlement.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're related in that one side of each of these markets consists of Bitcoin miners paying for things or buying things, if you like, with energy or computations. In that sense, they're similar. They're also deeply connected, because one of those markets, the market to release Bitcoin into circulation, is going to end eventually and have to therefore necessarily be replaced in terms of economic incentive by the other market. So that's very much related. But I actually like to think of them as very separate concepts. And so the first market is actually a market between the entire Bitcoin network and the entire mining industry to release the initial supply of Bitcoin, which was 21 million coins, which I now believe was created in 2008 or 2009 approximately. And we're releasing that pre-existing supply into circulation on a predetermined schedule. And that's Satoshi's monetary policy. And how do we know how much to release? Well, it's fixed based on the number of blocks that was pre-decided. How do we know what price to sell it for? That's the difficulty adjustment. So really, you can think of that combination of the block subsidy, 6.25 Bitcoin right now, and the current network difficulty as effectively a price. Like, that's a standing order that the Bitcoin network is offering to the entire mining industry. They're saying, if you give me this many computations, I'll give you 6.25 Bitcoin, guaranteed. And what's interesting to me is that it is really a market between two aggregates, the entire network and the entire industry. Like, consider, for example, every time a block is produced, right? The miner or miners, mining pool or whatever that created that, they didn't perform the full amount of computation. Like, almost certainly, right? They only had a share of the computation based on their share of hash rate. But overall, like, everyone else who didn't win that block, collectively, the network did provide that exact price and computations. So more or less, like, that is just what's happening. Bitcoin has a standing order of every 10 minutes, I will sell another 6.25 Bitcoin. Here's the current price. I will change the price every 2 weeks. And in fact, we will all change the price in concert using a deterministic algorithm that we each independently execute. And this is very important because this is what allows Bitcoin to be centralized, right? That process of market making and choosing the price at which we're going to sell the next tranche of coins is not something we have to go back to an oracle or a centralized third party to determine. It's something that we each independently but identically calculate on each of our nodes using the same shared blockchain as input. So this is like one very specific kind of market. I actually think the market for transaction settlement is different. Like the market for transactional settlement is not between aggregates, it's between individuals. It is you as a Bitcoin user taking a certain amount of Bitcoin and using it to purchase a spot in the next block. So the inherent scarcity there is not a predetermined supply, it's a fixed block size. And the seller of that resource is a particular miner. All right, so it's a market between individuals, like in a peer-to-peer way, whereas the market for the release of Bitcoin is actually a market between aggregates. And I think it necessarily has to be that way. So that's just an interesting distinction that I like to hold. So coming back to the relationship to energy, that's really how I like to think about that first market for the release of coins, right? That market is basically Bitcoin, the network, saying, here's my price in energy to get these Bitcoins. And then the Bitcoin industry pays that price. Now, difficulty adjustment comes through the bidding aspect of the time that it takes for the network, for the industry to provide that price, right? If the industry is taking on average 12 minutes to pay that price, well, then that means the price is too high. We need to lower the price a little bit. If the industry is on average taking 8 minutes to pay that price, well, then we need to increase the price. And so really, yeah, this is a Bitcoin is kind of doing market making to not turn energy into Bitcoin, but to exchange energy for Bitcoin. And that's really the way I like to think about it. And of course, the price of Bitcoin in energy is increasing because the price of Bitcoin as denominated in any other asset is increasing because Bitcoin's value is increasing. And so that's like the right way that I think to frame the problem. So if I were sitting with Saylor here, I might offer him that criticism like, hey buddy, I appreciate the cyber hornets and all that great stuff, but it's not really energy that turns into money. It's just energy being traded for money. That's a free trade that's made in the marketplace by individuals. And notions of efficiency don't really come into play here the way that maybe some environmentalist concern might present that as a problem. Like, no, it's not a problem because we're not talking about the manufacture of Bitcoin. We're talking about the sale of Bitcoin for that energy.
An auction every 10 minutes for the most scarce asset for that 10 minutes, which becomes more scarce. It's like, it's mad, isn't it? When you, yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, and I've written about this in a few places. I don't think it's just beautiful. I think it's necessary. Like, I don't think there's any other way to build a system like this. Like, and it sort of connects to the fun space things that I've written about. But like, literally, this is sort of how I got to thinking about those notions. I was like, man, if aliens existed and they had computers and they had a society where people have different opinions and disagree about things, and therefore they have a requirement to allocate finite resources amongst different people with different views, they'll eventually find Bitcoin, right? Like that's not it's not a conditional invention that like only could be made here on Earth. Like, I don't know, a guitar only makes sense if you're a primate with 10 fingers and 2 arms, right? Like I wouldn't expect necessarily a group of squid-based aliens who live in the water or something to have guitars. Like, that doesn't make sense. But they would have Bitcoin because I think like fusion or electronics or communications technology or encryption itself, like these are kind of universal technologies that hopefully any sufficiently advanced society that has those problems would invent. So in that sense, I view Bitcoin as sort of not something we invented, but rather something we discovered.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and yeah, your 3-part series again on that. That's you, for anybody listening, if they want to go listen to Guy Swan, rather than read it if they're driving around. That's the way I get through the articles, and yeah, they're mind melters, mate. Really, they're very fun. And the great thing about Guy is, then he does the guy's take afterwards, and he's going down all the different rabbit holes. So I've listened to them a bunch of times, and yeah, they're very interesting. And I urge everybody to go and check those out. So, Drew, I know we've gone over time, and I know you've got another call coming up. So I'm going to hit you with the final question, and then I promise to let you go. If you had one last orange pill left to give to somebody, who would you give it to and why?
Man, what a cool question. I would definitely pick a physicist, like a very prominent, well-known physicist. and get them really excited about Bitcoin and want them to start researching it and building a whole research program around it and teaching other physicists about how interesting this is. I think partly that you might argue that there's a little bit of ego maybe driving that, like, hey, I left physics and I want those people that I left to like appreciate the thing that I'm doing now. Okay, maybe there's a bit of that. But also I would say that physicists are I think one of the best things about physicists is that they're very brave. Like they'll wade into any new field and start talking about it and thinking about it and building models in it. I think sometimes to the annoyance of the people in that field, but also the history of many fields, economics, biology, etc. There's a lot of instances where a physicist came in and provided kind of a leg up and provided a new way of thinking about that field. I think partly that's because physicists are one of the few professions that's actually taught how to build models, not how to use models, but like how to build them. I think physicists and maybe traders to a degree like are really are the only folks that really constantly build and test and design and refine and iterate on the notion of the model itself. And so that gives a lot of physicists often a leg up when they're in a new arena that lacks, models. Like we don't know how to think about this thing yet. We don't know how it works. We have some heuristic understanding, but we don't have a deep theoretical model. That's a great opportunity for a physicist to come in and start providing some analysis. And so I think Bitcoin can benefit from that kind of attention from academia broadly, but also specifically from physicists. I think whether it's quantum computing, whether it's analyzing the historical behavior of Bitcoin, I often think of Bitcoin itself like a thermodynamic system in the sense that it self-regulates, right? That obviously, like, I think it's really powerful to imagine that you built a machine in 2008 and you launched it and it operated without interference for 15 years. And it grew by like 17 orders of magnitude during that time period. And yet it is basically still working exactly on clock like you expected. Like I like to think about like if every block is 10 minutes, after, however many blocks, after 800,000 blocks or whatever it is that we're up to right now, like what time should it be? Right? How much time should have elapsed? And if you look at that calculation, like Bitcoin is off by like 5%. So it's sort of dead reckoning time, right, as it moves through its blockchain, and it's accumulated a 5% error over 15 years, and it's grown by 17 orders of magnitude or some crazy number. Like to me, this is an incredibly self-regulating machine that we've made, right? This is almost it has the ability to keep equilibrium or homeostasis better than any other machine humans have ever built ever. So that's got to be interesting to a scientist, to a physicist, like how does its internal, like how does it equilibrate so well? How does it able to maintain that so well? That's a very deeply interesting question. And if we want to get really like out there, I think there's some interesting things that can go in the other direction, like things that we can learn about physics by looking at Bitcoin. It starts to get much more speculative, but I do think there's a lot of interesting discourse there. So if I could pick anybody to orange pill, it wouldn't be, the head of some government or a bank or a politician or anything like that. I would pick like a really cool, smart physics person, and I would want to sit with them, and I would want to watch them analyze all this stuff, and be one of the first people that gets to learn about their amazing discoveries. I think that would be super fun for me personally.
Awesome. Well, for all those physics majors that are listening, where can they reach out to you so that you can put this plan into action?
Perfect. Yes. So I'm at Unchained, and I often blog on our blog. You can find my writing there, but I'm also on Twitter. I'm not super active, but I'm very passively paying attention. So I'm easy to find. Message me, shoot me a note. I'm Drew Vansel on Twitter.
All right. Excellent. Not at Drew on Twitter.
Not at Drew. He's even cooler.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I mean, he was a commercial airline pilot and everything. I got to get that guy on,
No, you should. Yeah, you should.
All right, brother. Well, it's been great to get to know you. Thank you so much for giving up the time. Sorry I've kept you. And yeah, have a great day. And
No, it was awesome.
Look forward to meeting you in person.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited about round 2.
Excellent, mate.
We barely talked about AI or computer security or all the other crazy things that we could be getting into. So definitely they'll have to be around 2 sometime, Daniel.
Totally down for that. Thanks for coming on.
All right, man. All right, have a good one. Thank you.